Hi, welcome to Sue Marie P. My name's Sue and today I'm going to share a spelt and buckwheat bread. I love sharing easy homemade bread ideas and I like cooking with buckwheat and spelt flour, and I've been playing around with two different versions. So this one I made a few days ago, like on the weekend, and we've been eating it all week, and I've also frozen some in the freezer. It tastes really good, and the buckwheat flour has less gluten in it, so it's kind of like half gluten-free. Does that make sense? Or a bit kinder on the tummy, but still, you know, jam-packed full of fibre and all goodness. This one I test baked today, and I added in some apple cider vinegar and a little bit of baking powder just to see if I can get it fluffier, but it didn't really make much difference, and the taste isn't as good. So what I'm going to share with you is kind of a version of my wholemeal or whole grain spelt bread, but with half or almost half buckwheat flour. So in here we're going to do 200 grams of buckwheat. And buckwheat flour I've been baking with for over 10 years, but I really wanted to introduce some buckwheat into bread making, and I haven't done that yet because it always ends up being quite dense. So I thought, first step, I'm going to do half buckwheat and half spelt. So that's 200 grams, which is about just a little over a cup. And then I'm going to do 300 grams of my whole grain spelt flour. So what I'm going to do is just whisk those two together. And I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt. What I'd recommend if you're using dried yeast at home, which is this fast action dried yeast, which I usually use, pop one packet in or 7 grams. But I've bought some fresh yeast, which I need to use up by the 1st of April. So I'm going to use that today. And I just thought I'd try doing it. So it's just an alternative and a different way of doing it. So you double the amount of fresh yeast. So it's 14 grams of the fresh yeast. So I need 300 mils of water. So what I do is I do 100 of boiling kettle water. And then I've got just room temperature water here. So another 200 mils of that. And that's a really nice temperature. And what I'll do is I'm going to pop the yeast in there just to dissolve it before I pop it in here. And I'm not adding any sugar into my bread, but if you want to add sugar, you can add a teaspoon. I want to make sure that that's all mixed through. So I'm going to let that sit there for about 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm going to pop my timer on, just so it gets a little bit activated. But if you're using the dried yeast, you don't have to wait. So it's a good idea to get your loaf tin ready. So I'm going to use my just small loaf tin. It's about 900 grams. And I'm going to add a little bit of oil to it. You can add oil, butter. I like to grease it. Just go in with your hand and swivel the oil around. That was probably a bit too much then. And then just for ease of getting it out so it doesn't get stuck, I add a little bit of baking paper. Can't speak today, so just pop that in. And it's usually a little bit longer on the side, so then I can lift it out quite easily. So that's all ready, just waiting on our yeast. So I've waited 10 minutes and my yeast hasn't bubbled up. So I actually think my fresh yeast is dead. I tried, the jug didn't bubble. I tried a second packet and it still didn't bubble. So I'm going to flick the fresh yeast. So if that happens to you, don't try and pop it in your bread because the yeast is dead. Even though it says used by 1st of April, it's not going to work. So I'm going to revert back to my dried yeast. So I'm going to pop the dried yeast into my warm water. Here I was thinking I was being clever using fresh yeast for a change, and it's just not good enough to use, and I don't want to spoil my bread. So I'm just going to dissolve the dried yeast, and that's foaming up already in my little jug here. I'm going to make a well. Use a wooden spoon or your hand. I'm just going to use this spatula to start it off. And then what I like to do to give it a little bit of extra moisture and flavour, I like to add a little bit of olive oil. So I'm going to go in with a tablespoon of olive oil. If you don't use olive oil and you've got a different type of oil, that would still work. Just going to scrape some of the dough off the spatula. And I'll start using my hand just to bring all that together. And because I've used spelt and buckwheat flour, they're not so glutinous, so the gluten fibres are quite short, so it doesn't need the kneading like regular flour needs to knead. You don't need to work it as much. So once our bowl looks clean, this bread only needs one proof time as well, which is usually about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how warm your kitchen is or your house is. So once you've got kind of like a nice dough formed, I should have prepared some flour to my bench. So I'm just going to add a little bit of spelt flour to the bench. It's hard when you're in the throes of filming and you've got dough all over your hands and you don't have anyone near you to help. So we're just going to work that into a loaf. So I've got kind of my loaf shape here. Grab your prepared tin and I'm going to place that in there. So now we need to cover it so it doesn't dry out. So I'm just going to grab some plastic wrap and add a little bit of oil to it. Just before I do that, I'm going to add some sesame seeds to the top, but to make sure the sesame seeds stick, I don't want to use an egg or anything. I'm going to use some water, so I'm going to brush some water on top. Grab a pastry brush and some water and just brush the top of your bread. Sesame seeds just make it look really pretty, so I'm just adding some sesame seeds. So they'll stick now because I've got water on it, and I need to grab my plastic. Drizzle of oil. Place the oil plastic on top of the loaf, just kind of like loosely covering it. So I'm going to put my timer on for about 45 minutes and wait till it doubles in size. In the meantime, you can, about 20 minutes before you're ready, you can pop your oven on to 220 degrees C, and I'll pop the Fahrenheit measurements above just to get it warm and ready for the bread. So I'm back with my spelt buckwheat bread, and it's been about 45 minutes and my kitchen's lovely and warm, so it's doubled in size. Just going to release this plastic and it's looking really good. Look at that. I'm going to bake it now in the hot oven for 10 minutes at 220, and then I'm going to lower it to 200 degrees and cook it for about another 20 to 30 minutes. And my little tip for baking bread, I pop a little ramekin of water in the base of the oven, and that keeps the crust lovely and thin and creates a bit of more moisture and steam in the oven. The 10-minute timer's on. I'll come back and pop the temperature down to 200 degrees, and I can't wait to show you. The 10-minute timer's going off, so I'm just going to pop my oven down to 200 degrees. And I'm going to set it for another 20 minutes and keep an eye on it because it might only need 20 minutes, not 30. Our bread's all baked. It only took an extra 20 minutes. It's been cooling here on the bench for 10 minutes, so I'm going to remove it and then let it cool completely before I slice it open and show you. So I'll let it cool and then I'll come back and I'll slice it up. So it's been over an hour and I've let my bread cool, and I've just sliced it up and taken some photos, and it's lovely and it's got a really thin crust on it. I'm not going to eat any now because it's almost dinner time, but I like to slice it thinly, ready for breakfast, to toast. It's a denser bread than like a normal loaf, but it's delicious toasted, so give it a go. Let me know in the comments below if you do try it. And I love sharing interesting bread recipes with you, so if there's anything you'd love to see, pop the comment below. I do still have making sourdough bread with spelt on my to-do list, but we're moving soon, so I'm going to wait till I move to get my starter all ready. And just a storage tip, I usually store it in like a little Pyrex container like that. I add a bit of paper to the bottom. Let me just grab some. Yeah, so to store it, I add the paper towel just to the bottom, just takes away the moisture, and I pop the loaf in once it's all cooled, and I can freeze these ones that I've already cut, but I just pop it in there with the lid, and that usually lasts on the bench for about 2 to 3 days. If I think that we're not going to eat it all, I'll slice it up and pop it in the freezer. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed my spelt buckwheat bread today. Once again, Let me know in the comments below what you think of it. I love getting your comments, and stick around. I'll pop some other of my popular bread recipes above. And if you're new here today, consider subscribing. All you need is have a Google account, hit the bell, and then you get notified when I have a new video. I do roughly 2 videos a week. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for watching.